The sun hung like a hot copper penny in the vast New Mexico sky, baking the high desert plains until they shimmered with heat. Jack Holloway squinted beneath the brim of his weathered Stetson, guiding his buckskin gelding across terrain that had changed little since the Spanish first laid claim to it. His saddlebags were heavy with supplies from Cimarron: coffee, flour, salt pork, ammunition, necessities for another month of solitude at his modest ranch tucked against the foothills. At 53, Jack's face was a map of hard living. Deep lines framed pale blue eyes that had witnessed the country's violent transformation. The war between the states had claimed his youth, the Kansas cattle drives his middle years, and now this unforgiving land demanded what remained of his strength. Flecks of gray peppered his once auburn beard, and an old Comanche arrow wound made his right shoulder ache something fierce when the weather changed. He'd been riding since dawn, making slow progress in the August heat. Another hour and he'd need to rest the horse. Jack pulled a bandana from his pocket and wiped dust from his face, scanning the horizon by habit. 20 years on the frontier had taught him that survival depended on vigilance. That's when he saw it, a strange, dark shape against the endless tan landscape, maybe half a mile off. Jack reined in his horse. "What's that, Samson?" he muttered, reaching for his field glasses. Through the lenses, the shape resolved into something man-made, metal bars gleaming cruelly in the sunlight. A cage. Jack felt the old familiar tightening in his gut, the sensation that had saved his hide more times than he cared to remember. He slipped his Winchester from its scabbard and worked the lever, chambering around. "Easy now," he whispered to Samson, who sensed his tension and stamped nervously. "Might be nothing. Might be trouble." He approached cautiously, using what little cover the scrubby landscape provided. 300 yards out, he dismounted and proceeded on foot, rifle at the ready. 200 yards, and he could see it clearly. An iron cage about 4 feet high and 6 feet long, the kind used for transporting livestock. 100 yards, and Jack froze. Inside the cage was a human form. The cage sat exposed on a flat stretch of hardpan, no cover within 50 yards. If this was a trap, he'd be easy pickings for anyone lying in wait. Jack hunkered down behind a scraggly juniper and watched, unmoving, for nearly an hour. No movement except for the slight stirring of clothing on the figure in the cage. Either there was no ambush or they were patient enough to outlast him. By mid-afternoon, Jack had circled the area twice, checking for tracks. He found plenty: boot prints, horse droppings, wheel marks from a wagon, but they were at least 2 days old. Whoever had left this cage had departed. He approached directly then, rifle still ready. The figure inside didn't move. "Hello?" Jack called when he was 20 paces out. No response. When he reached the cage, Jack's stomach turned. Inside lay a girl, no more than 16 or 17, curled on her side. Her dark hair was matted with dust, her thin cotton dress torn and filthy. Her wrists were raw from metal shackles attached to the cage floor. A small clay jug lay empty beside her. "Jesus Christ," Jack whispered, kneeling. At his voice, the girl's eyes fluttered open. Dark, frightened eyes in a face burned red by the sun. Her cracked lips moved, but no sound came out. Jack immediately pulled his canteen and reached between the bars. "Here, not too fast now." She flinched away from his hand. "It's water," he said gently. "You need it." After a moment's hesitation, she reached for the canteen with trembling hands. Jack helped her take small sips, noting the way she winced with each swallow. 3 days without water, he guessed. Maybe 4. The padlock on the cage was solid iron. Jack examined it briefly before returning to Samson for his saddlebags. He returned with a small pouch of tools he'd carried since his days as a Union cavalry scout. "I'm going to get you out," he said, working on the lock. "My name's Jack Holloway. I've got a ranch about 8 miles east of here." The girl watched him silently, eyes wary as a trapped coyote's. The lock finally gave with a satisfying click. Jack swung the cage door open and reached in to examine her shackles. These were simpler affairs, and he had them off within minutes. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried, but her legs buckled immediately. Jack caught her before she hit the ground. She was alarmingly light, all bones and sinew beneath the threadbare dress. "What's your name?" he asked, supporting her weight. She hesitated, then whispered, "Isabel." "Who did this to you, Isabel?" Her eyes darted away. "I deserved it," she murmured, the words thick with accent. Jack's jaw tightened. "Nobody deserves this." She said nothing more as he helped her to Samson. The horse snorted uneasily at the strange scent, but stood firm as Jack lifted Isabel onto the saddle. It was nearly dusk. His ranch was still hours away, and she was in no condition to travel far. "We'll make camp," he decided. "Get some food in you, then head home tomorrow." That night, beneath a blanket of stars, Jack built a small fire and coaxed Isabel to eat a little jerky softened in water and a few bites of hardtack. She sat huddled in his spare blanket, staring into the flames. "Whoever left you there," Jack said finally, "they'll be looking for me if I take you to my place." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. "Number, please, I will go. Tomorrow, I can walk." "That's not what I meant. You're not fit to go anywhere on your own." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I'm just saying we might have trouble coming. I need to know what kind." Isabel looked down. "Mi familia," she whispered. "My family." Jack waited. "My uncle, my brothers." Her voice was barely audible. "They say I bring shame." "What shame?" Her fingers twisted in the blanket. "I talked to a man, American man, in town." She swallowed hard. "My uncle see me. Say I am." She struggled for the word. "Puta." Jack's expression hardened. He'd seen this before, the harsh code that governed family honor in the traditional Mexican households. But this was barbaric even by frontier standards. "And they left you to die for that?" Isabel nodded slowly. "To let God judge." Her voice cracked. 3 days ago. They say if I live, it is His will." Jack stared into the fire, feeling the familiar cold anger that had carried him through Shiloh and a dozen other bloodbaths. "Where's your family from?" "Las Ciénegas, small place, south." Jack knew it, a collection of adobe buildings 30 miles southwest, populated mostly by Mexican sheepherders and their families. Isolated, traditional, not friendly to outsiders. "Your parents?" "Dead, 2 winters past, fever." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Uncle Mateo, he take me in?" Jack nodded slowly. "Get some sleep. We've got riding to do tomorrow." Isabel lay down near the fire, still clutching the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Jack remained seated, Winchester across his knees, watching the darkness beyond their small circle of light. Dawn found them already riding, Isabel seated behind Jack, her thin arms wrapped tentatively around his waist. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge that overlooked Jack's spread, a modest affair compared to some, but it was his. A small cabin with a stone chimney stood beside a barn and corral. A creek ran nearby, feeding a carefully tended vegetable garden. 2 milk cows grazed in a fenced pasture, and chickens scratched in the yard. "Home," Jack said, and felt Isabel's grip tighten slightly. The next days fell into an uneasy routine. Jack set Isabel up in the small room off the kitchen that had once belonged to his long-dead wife. He found her some old clothes, patched and faded but clean. He showed her where the spring house kept food cool, how to feed the chickens, which vegetables in the garden were ready for picking. Isabel moved like a ghost through these tasks, speaking little, startling at sudden noises. At night, Jack often heard her crying softly in her room. During the day, he'd sometimes find her staring toward the southern horizon, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. "You can stay as long as you need," he told her over a supper of beans and cornbread one evening. "Until you figure what's next." She looked up from her barely touched plate. "Why you help me? You don't know me." Jack considered the question. "Reckon I've seen enough people not get helped when they needed it." A fortnight after finding Isabel, Jack needed supplies again. He'd been putting off the trip to town, knowing the questions that would come, but they were running low on essentials. "I'll be back before sundown," he told Isabel as he saddled Samson. "Bar the door. Rifles loaded, just in case." She nodded, eyes anxious. "Be careful, Señor Jack." Cimarron hadn't changed in the 2 weeks since his last visit. Same dusty main street, same false-fronted buildings housing the general store, saloon, and assayer's office. Same men lounging on the boardwalk, watching newcomers with suspicious eyes. Jack tied Samson outside Hargrove's Mercantile and stepped inside, nodding to Tom Hargrove behind the counter. "Jack Holloway," Tom greeted him. "Beginning to think you'd moved on." "Just busy," Jack replied, handing over his list of supplies. Tom's eyes scanned the paper. "Bit more than your usual order. Taking on hands for the winter?" Jack met his gaze steadily. "Number?" Tom held his eyes a moment longer, then shrugged and began gathering items. "Heard some strange talk from down La Ciénegas way. Mexican family lost a girl, claiming she was stolen by a gringo rancher." Jack kept his expression neutral. "That's so. Been asking around. Described a man sounds a fair bit like you, Jack." Tom placed a sack of flour on the counter with deliberate care. "Course, I told him I didn't know nothing about it. Appreciate that. Thing is," Tom continued, measuring coffee beans into a paper sack, "they seemed mighty determined. Said the girl was simple-minded, needed looking after. Said whoever took her was likely taking advantage." Jack's jaw tightened. "That what they said?" "Uh-huh." Tom leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. "Listen, Jack, I don't know what's going on and I don't much care, but Mateo Ortega and his boys ain't the forgiving sort. They catch wind you're involved, there'll be trouble." "I can handle trouble." Tom sighed. "Maybe so, but Ortega's got kin all through the territory. You ready to handle that much trouble?" Jack paid for his supplies and loaded them onto Samson. As he mounted up, he noticed 3 Mexican men watching him from across the street, outside the saloon. One nudged another and pointed. He rode home at a steady pace, taking a roundabout route and checking his back trail frequently. No one followed, but the encounter left him uneasy. Things were coming to a head faster than he'd anticipated. Isabel was waiting anxiously in the doorway when he returned. Relief flooded her face at the sight of him, followed immediately by concern as she read his expression. "They were in town," she said, "not a question." Jack nodded, unsaddling Samson. "Your uncle and brothers, I expect?" That night after supper, Isabel finally told her full story. Her uncle had arranged for her to marry a man from Santa Fe, a widower 30 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty. When she had begged to refuse, her uncle had beaten her. In desperation, she had sought help from the American shopkeeper in Las Ciénegas, asking if he knew of work elsewhere. Her brother had seen them talking and assumed the worst. She faltered. "I never do anything wrong. Just ask for help." Jack believed her. In the weeks she'd been with him, Isabel had revealed herself to be intelligent and hard-working, picking up English quickly and mastering the routines of ranch life. There was a quiet dignity to her that reminded Jack of his wife, Sarah, dead these 15 years from the consumption. "I'll teach you to shoot tomorrow," he said. The lessons began at dawn. Jack showed Isabel how to load the old Navy Colt, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. Her first shots went wild, but by midday she was hitting the cans he'd set up on the fence posts. "Good," he said approvingly. "Again." They practiced daily after that. Jack taught her to ride properly, too, on his gentle mare Bessie, and in the evenings he helped her with her English, using the few books he owned. a Bible, a tattered copy of Shakespeare's plays, and a dog-eared edition of Twain's Roughing It. The days grew shorter as September yielded to October. The first autumn chill touched the mornings, and Jack began preparations for winter, mending fences, chopping wood, smoking meat. Isabel worked alongside him, her skin darkening from ranch work rather than exposure. Her frame filling out as regular meals restored her health. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings by the fire, Jack found himself watching her as she bent over her mending or practiced her letters. There was nothing untoward in his gaze, just wonder at the resilience of this young woman who had endured so much, and perhaps a touch of paternal pride at how far she'd come. Word would have spread by now. Jack knew this as surely as he knew winter was coming. In Cimarron, in Las Ciénegas, in the scattered ranches between, people would be talking. The solitary rancher and the Mexican girl. Rumors would grow like weeds after rain. Jack took to carrying his rifle whenever he worked outside the cabin. He taught Isabel to watch the horizon, to listen for approaching riders. He showed her a hiding place beneath the floorboards where she could conceal herself if trouble came while he was away. It was a bright November morning when Jack spotted the dust on the southern trail. 3 riders moving purposefully toward his ranch. He was splitting wood in the yard while Isabel gathered eggs from the hen house. "Isabel," he called, keeping his voice calm. "Go inside now." She looked up, saw his expression, then followed his gaze to the approaching riders. The color drained from her face. "Inside," Jack repeated. "Remember what I showed you." Isabel hesitated only a moment before hurrying to the cabin. Jack heard the bar drop across the door. He set down his axe and walked unhurriedly to the porch, where his Winchester leaned against the wall. The riders drew up 50 yards from the cabin. Jack recognized the leader immediately from Tom's description, Mateo Ortega, a stocky man with a face like carved obsidian, his black mustache streaked with gray. Flanking him were 2 younger men, presumably Isabel's brothers. All 3 wore pistols. The younger men carried rifles as well. "Buenos dias, Senor Holloway," Ortega called. "We come to speak with you." Jack remained on the porch, rifle held casually across his body. Then, "Speak." "You have something that belongs to my family. My niece, Isabel." "Far as I know, people don't belong to other people in this country." Ortega's face darkened. "She is a child, under my care by law and by God. She's old enough to choose for herself." "She is sick in the head," the older of the brothers cut in. "Not right, tells lies." Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. "She seems right enough to me." "You would say this," Ortega replied coldly. "A man alone, taking a young girl. We know what you want from her." "You don't know a damn thing about me." "I know you are a thief of honor," Ortega spat. "Give us the girl. We will forget this happened." Jack shook his head slowly. "Can't do that." "Then we take her." Ortega's hand moved toward his pistol. The Winchester came up in one smooth motion, aimed squarely at Ortega's chest. "I wouldn't." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from behind Jack, came the sound of the cabin door opening. "No more!" Isabel's voice rang out. She stepped onto the porch beside Jack, the Navy Colt steady in her hands. "No more blood." Ortega's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "You point a gun at your family? At your blood?" "You left me to die," Isabel replied, her voice shaking but resolute. "You are not my family now." The younger brother spat on the ground. "Puta." Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, but Isabel laid a restraining hand on his arm. "I choose to stay here," she said clearly. "I work for Senior Holloway. Honest work. He has been kind when you were cruel." "You shame us all," Ortega growled. "The shame is yours," Isabel answered. "Go home, Tio. Tell everyone I am dead if you wish, but I will not go with you." Ortega stared at her for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to Jack. "This is not finished." "It can be," Jack said quietly. "Right here, right now. You ride away, leave the girl be, or we can end it different." The tension stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Jack knew they were weighing the odds, 3 against 2, but with Jack's reputation as a former cavalry scout and the defensive position he and Isabel held. Finally, Ortega jerked his head in a curt nod. "For now." He turned his horse. "Come, boys." The brothers followed reluctantly, casting murderous glances back at the cabin. Jack and Isabel remained motionless on the porch, weapons ready, until the riders disappeared over the ridge. That night, Jack sat by the fire cleaning his rifle while Isabel worked on her letters at the table. "They'll be back," he said finally. Isabel looked up. "I know." "Might not be just them next time." She nodded, setting down her pencil. "What will we do?" Jack considered. He could send her away. To Denver, perhaps, or further east where Ortega's reach wouldn't extend. But that would mean facing the world alone. A young Mexican woman with limited English and no money. Or they could run together. Sell the ranch, head to California or Oregon. Start fresh. But Jack had spent his life running before finding this place. He was too old to begin again. "We'll stay," he said finally. "This is our home now. We'll defend it." Isabel's eyes widened at the word "our," then softened with something like gratitude. "I can learn more," she said. "Be better with the gun. Help more with the ranch." Jack nodded. "We'll make it work." The weeks passed. They reinforced the cabin, added a lookout platform on the barn roof, prepared for the possibility of a siege. Jack rode into Cimarron only when absolutely necessary, always heavily armed, always returning by different routes. In town, he heard whispers. Some condemned him, assuming the worst about his relationship with Isabel. Others, who knew Jack's character, reserved judgment. A few, like Tom Hargrove, offered quiet support, warning him of rumors or suspicious strangers asking questions. December came, bringing snow to the high country. Jack and Isabel settled into a winter routine, tending livestock, mending tack, preserving food. In the evenings, Jack taught her to play checkers and told stories of his days driving cattle up from Texas. Sometimes, when the mood was right, Isabel would sing soft Mexican folk songs her mother had taught her. It was almost like family, Jack thought one evening, watching Isabel set bread dough to rise near the fire. Not that he'd had much experience with family. His own parents had died before he was grown. His marriage to Sarah had been cut short before they could have children. But this felt right somehow. A second chance at something he'd long ago stopped hoping for. The attack came with the first January thaw, when the trails were passable again. Jack was in the barn when he heard Isabel's warning shout from the lookout. 7 riders approaching fast from the south. He grabbed his rifle and ran for the cabin. Isabel was already there, barring the door behind him, the Navy Colt tucked in her belt. "Ortega?" Jack asked, peering through the gun slit beside the window. "Yes, and others, not just my brothers." Jack counted quickly. Ortega, the 2 brothers, and 4 men he didn't recognize. Hard-looking fellows with the unmistakable bearing of hired guns. "Get down," he ordered as the first shots splintered the window frame. What followed was a methodical siege. The attackers surrounded the cabin, firing whenever Jack or Isabel showed themselves at a window. As dusk approached, 2 men tried to reach the barn, presumably to flush them toward the others. Jack's careful shooting drove them back. Night fell. The firing ceased, but Jack knew they were still out there, waiting. "They'll try to burn us out," he told Isabel as they huddled by the stone fireplace, the only light in the cabin. She nodded grimly. "What can we do?" Jack had been considering their options. They had food and water for days, but ammunition was limited. The attackers had the advantage of numbers and could wait them out. "There's a ravine behind the north pasture," he said. "Leads up into the hills. If we could reach it after dark—" Isabel's eyes gleamed with understanding. "We go out the back, while they watch the front. It's risky. Moon's bright tonight." She squared her shoulders. Better than burning. They gathered what they could carry: ammunition, food, water, warm clothes. Jack knew they might never return to the cabin. Everything he'd worked for these past years might be lost. But as he looked at Isabel's determined face in the firelight, he found he didn't much care. "Ready?" he whispered, his hand on the back door latch. Isabel nodded, clutching her pistol. They slipped out into the bitter cold, keeping the cabin between themselves and the attackers. Jack led the way, moving from shadow to shadow across the moonlit yard toward the darkness of the north pasture. They had almost reached the fence when a shout went up. A muzzle flash split the darkness, and Jack felt the wind of a bullet passing his ear. "Run!" he urged Isabel, returning fire to cover their retreat. They scrambled over the fence as more shots rang out. Jack felt a sharp pain in his side but kept moving. Behind them, voices shouted in Spanish and English. Boots pounded on frozen ground. The ravine loomed ahead, a black gash in the earth. Jack pushed Isabel toward it. "Go! I'll hold them off." She hesitated, her face anguished. "No, come with me." "I'll be right behind you," he promised, taking position behind a boulder. "Go now." Isabel disappeared into the ravine as the first pursuers came into view. Jack aimed carefully and fired. A man cried out and fell. The others scattered, seeking cover. Jack fired twice more, forcing the attackers to keep their distance. Then he backed toward the ravine, one careful step at a time. He was almost there when Ortega's voice rang out from the darkness. "Holloway, this can end now. Give us the girl and walk away." Jack said nothing, continuing his retreat. "She is not worth dying for," Ortega called. "She is nothing to you." At the edge of the ravine, Jack paused. "You're wrong about that," he called back. Then he slipped into the darkness where Isabel waited. They climbed all night, following the ravine up into the foothills. Jack's side burned where the bullet had grazed him, but he pushed through the pain. Behind them, they occasionally heard voices and saw the distant glow of torches as their pursuers searched. But the rugged terrain and darkness worked in their favor. Dawn found them high in the hills, looking down on Jack's ranch in the distance. Smoke rose from the cabin roof. "They burned it," Isabel whispered, her voice breaking. Jack put his arm around her shoulders. "Just wood and mud. Can be rebuilt." They watched in silence as the distant figures of riders gathered, then eventually dispersed, heading south toward Las Ciénegas. "What now?" Isabel asked. Jack considered their options. They could head for Cimarron, but Ortega might have men watching the town. Denver was too far with winter still holding the high country in its grip. "West," he decided, "to the mining camps in the mountains. I've got friends there from the old days. We can lie low until spring, then decide." Isabel nodded, her face resolved despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "And then?" "Then," Jack said, "we come back. Rebuild. This is our home. They will come again." "Maybe." Jack gazed at the smoking remains of his cabin. "Or maybe they'll reckon we're not worth the trouble. Either way, we'll be ready." Isabel was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I am sorry. For all this." Jack shook his head. "Don't be. Some things are worth fighting for." "What things?" Jack thought about the question as he looked out over the land he'd come to love. The harsh, beautiful country that had finally given him a purpose. And, beside him, this brave young woman who had somehow become family. "A home," he said simply, "and the right to choose your own path." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. Perhaps her first genuine smile since he'd found her in that cage. Gracias, Jack. Come on, he said, adjusting his pack. We've got ground to cover before nightfall. They turned away from the smoldering ranch and headed west, toward the distant mountains shining gold in the morning sun. Whatever came next, they would face it together.